What's up everybody, blessed be, my name is Manon and you are watching Witch in the Working, where we will be discussing all things witchy in and around, throughout and about, above, below, and beyond. This video offers my personal views on the topic at hand. Please visit me on my other platforms as well, including Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon, all linked down in the description below. The full script of this video and most of the others is available on my Patreon account for download if desired to build your own Witch in the Working Book of Shadows. Do you need help with a spell or fancy a tarot reading? Shoot on over to my store, Bewitching and Bizarre, listed down in the description below for your personalized working and or reading. Witchcraft is one of those words that instantly sparks curiosity. But here's the thing, not everyone who practices magic or connects with the spiritual world actually calls themselves a witch. That's something we've got to clear up right away. The way witchcraft and Wicca are known and practiced in America is not how things look everywhere else. Across the world, tons of cultures have their own magical traditions, rituals, and spiritual practices that are just as powerful and fascinating. The catch? They don't all fit neatly under the label of witchcraft. In this episode of Witch in the Working, we're going to journey across the globe and talk about other systems of magic from multiple cultures. So get yourself comfortable, grab your favorite comfy drink, and roll intro. Welcome back everybody. In the United States, when people think of witchcraft, they often imagine pointy hats, spell books, or Wicca. Now, Wicca is a specific type of witchcraft that really took off in the mid-20th century thanks to a guy named Gerald Gardner in England. It's got structured rituals, coven systems, and a focus on honoring a god and goddess. It's also legally recognized as a religion in several countries, including the US. But even though Wicca is one of the most popular forms of witchcraft in America today, it's far from being the only way magic is practiced worldwide. See, Wicca has some roots in older European folk traditions, ceremonial magic, and even a sprinkle of ancient pagan beliefs. It's a patchwork of ideas from the British Isles, mixed with ceremonial influences from groups like the Golden Dawn. But here's where it gets interesting. Just because something involves magic, spirits, or rituals doesn't mean it's anything like Wicca, and it sure doesn't mean people practicing it would even call what they're doing witchcraft. In places like Haiti, Brazil, Mexico, the Philippines, and in Scandinavia, magical practices are often so woven into everyday life and culture that separating them out feels almost impossible. They're connected to religion, healing, storytelling, or honoring ancestors in ways that make them unique. Sometimes they're not considered magic at all by the people practicing them. Instead, they might be seen as simple acts of faith, family traditions, or even just practical solutions to everyday problems. Here's a cool example. In Haiti, practitioners of voodoo communicate with spirits known as the Loa. They perform rituals involving drumming, dance, and even spirit possession. It's a huge part of their culture, but calling a voodoo priest or priestess a witch might not be accurate or respectful. The same goes for Brazil, where candomblé or Umbanda bring together African, indigenous, and Catholic practices into something completely unique. Practitioners call upon deities called orishas through dance and music, and their rituals are just as organized and meaningful as any Wiccan circle. But they don't call it witchcraft. They have their own words and traditions for what they do. In Mexico, words like brujeria and curanderismo cover a wide range of practices that can include both healing and cursing. By the way, there's a lot of words in this video that are foreign to me, and I'm not the best at pronouncing them. So I apologize ahead of time if I pronounce something totally out of whack. I'm doing the best I can. So here we go. Some people might identify as witches, but many see themselves more as healers or spiritual guides. The same goes for the Philippines, where terms like mangkukulam and albularyo describe practitioners with very specific skills, like herbal healing or spirit communication. Then there's Scandinavia, with ancient practices like sider and runic magic. These go way back to Norse mythology and were used for everything from divination to connecting with spirits. Today, some people are reviving these practices as part of modern modern heathenry, but they're not always comfortable with being called witches. For them, it's more about connecting with their heritage and spirituality. What makes all of these magical systems different from Wicca is their roots. Wicca is a modern creation stitched together from various sources, but built into something fresh and structured. Most other traditions grew slowly from the culture they belong to. They weren't created by any one person or written down as a set of rules. Instead, they were passed along through families, communities, or apprenticeships. Another big difference, Wicca tends to be a religion in itself, with rituals, beliefs, and ethical guidelines like the Wiccan Rede. Many of these other traditions aren't religions by themselves, but practices within broader belief systems. For example, voodoo is deeply tied to Catholicism and traditional African religions. In Mexico, curanderismo often works hand in hand with Catholic beliefs, with practitioners using prayers and saints right alongside herbs and candles. It's also important to remember that these traditions aren't all about spells and rituals. Sometimes they're about healing, protection, or simply showing respect to the spirits and deities that people believe in. And that's one of the biggest differences between what most Americans think of as witchcraft and what's going on around the world. When you start comparing these systems to American witchcraft or Wicca, it's like looking at different branches growing from the same tree. They might share some things in common like rituals, tools, or even the idea of casting spells, but they're shaped by their own cultures, beliefs, and histories. The coolest part, learning about these traditions from around the world doesn't take anything away from Wicca or other forms of witchcraft. Instead, it helps you understand just how creative, resilient, and beautiful magical practices can be, no matter where they come from or what they're called. And in the end, that's what makes exploring them so exciting. Haiti is an island country in the Caribbean with a rich and powerful spiritual tradition known as voodoo. If you're only familiar with voodoo from movies or TV, you probably think it's all about creepy dolls, curses, and spooky rituals. But here's the truth. It's so much more than that. Voodoo is a deeply meaningful, complex, and beautiful spiritual practice that mixes African, indigenous, and Catholic influences. It's got its own rules, beliefs, and ceremonies that have been passed down through generations, shaped by the hardships and resilience. To really get what voodoo is all about, you've got to understand where it came from. Haiti was a major center of the transatlantic slave trade during the 17th and 18th centuries. Enslaved Africans ripped from their homelands and cultures brought their spiritual beliefs with them. But instead of losing their traditions, they found ways to keep them alive, blending them with Catholicism where they were forced to adopt. What emerged was something unique, voodoo. Now, here's the first thing you should know. Practitioners of voodoo don't usually call themselves witches. Instead, they might be priests or priestesses known as hungans or mambos, or spiritual workers called bokors. They're all about connecting with spirits called Loa, who act as intermediaries between humans and a distant supreme being known as Bondaya. So what's the deal with these spirits? The Loa are like a big extended family. Each one has its own personality, preferences, symbols, and abilities. For instance, Papa Legba is the spirit who opens the gateway between the human world and the spirit realm. Without him, communication with the other Loa wouldn't even be possible. There's also Irzuli, a powerful spirit of love and beauty, and Baron Samadi, the guardian of death and resurrection. Every Loa has its own rituals, songs, dances, and even specific offerings they prefer, whether it's rum, cigars, or certain foods. One of the coolest things about voodoo is how interactive it is. Rituals are all about energy, music, and dance. Unlike the quiet, meditative, dark, or mysterious rituals you might find in Wicca, voodoo ceremonies are loud, vibrant, and communal. They often involve drumming, chanting, and dancing to help draw in the spirits, although this is not completely foreign to Wicca as well. I've been to plenty of Sabbats that actually just about every Sabbat I go to draws the same energy. So it's not like Wicca is absent of these vibrant rituals. Your Beltanes, your Samhains, no matter what they are, there's a part of them that gets very vibrant and very energetic. And yes, with the voodoo, sometimes those spirits will possess practitioners, but not in the scary Hollywood way. In voodoo, possession is considered an honor. It's a way for the Loa to communicate directly with their followers, offering advice, healing, or even delivering messages. Speaking of healing, that's a major part of voodoo. This isn't just a magical system, it's a living tradition deeply rooted in community and care. Hungans and Mambos often act as spiritual doctors, using rituals and herbal remedies to cure illnesses or solve personal problems. They also provide protection, guidance, and blessings for everything from love to business success. Because voodoo is so tied to Haiti's history and culture, it's also a form of resilience. During the Haitian Revolution, voodoo ceremonies played a big role in bringing people together and inspiring them to fight for freedom. Even now, with so much misunderstanding and negative stereotypes thrown at it, voodoo remains a strong and cherished part of Haitian identity. Now, you've probably heard about things like zombies and voodoo dolls. Here's where things get interesting. The Hollywood version of voodoo is mostly just a big pile of myths and misunderstandings. The idea of zombies actually came from Haitian folklore, but had more to do with spiritual punishment or slavery than shambling, brain-eating monsters. And those voodoo dolls, that's actually a European idea twisted into the voodoo narrative. While dolls are sometimes used in rituals, they're more often tools for healing, communication, or focusing energy rather than harming someone. You might be wondering how all of this compares to Wicca or other Western magical traditions. Well, while Wicca is usually a religious system built around honoring deities and working rituals for personal growth, voodoo is more about serving spirits who in turn help their followers. It's not about manipulating energy or casting spells in the way you might find in Wiccan rituals. Instead, it's about building relationships with the Loa, offering them what they need, and trusting them to guide you. In Haiti, voodoo isn't just something you practice on special occasions. It's woven into daily life. People might consult a hungan or mambo for healing or guidance, the same way someone else might go to a doctor or a therapist. It's spiritual, sure, but it's also practical and community-oriented. Another thing to remember is that voodoo doesn't have a big central book of rules like some Wiccan books of shadows. Instead, knowledge is mostly passed down through oral tradition, storytelling, and apprenticeship. You can't just pick up a book and learn voodoo. It's something you have to experience and earn through dedication and service. A lot like Gardnerian witchcraft. It's the same way. You just can't go get a book on Gardnerian witchcraft and learn about it. It's something that you have to learn person to person. Haiti's voodoo is its own thing, unmistakably unique, rich in tradition, and thriving despite centuries of misunderstanding and prejudice. And when you really start to understand what it's all about, you'll realize just how incredible and diverse the world's spiritual practices can be. When you think of Brazil, your mind probably jumps to carnival parades, samba music, or beautiful beaches. But Brazil's cultural landscape is also bursting with fascinating spiritual traditions that are colorful, powerful, and full of history. Two of the most unique are candomblé and Umbanda, systems that are a bit magical, a bit religious, and totally their own thing. These traditions were born from the African diaspora, brought to Brazil by enslaved people from places like Nigeria, Benin, and Angola. Just like Haitian voodoo, candomblé and Umbanda were shaped by a mix of African beliefs, indigenous knowledge, and Catholic elements. But even though they share some of the same roots, they're each very different and serve their followers in unique ways. Let's start with candomblé, which is all about honoring powerful spiritual beings called orishas. Orishas are like gods or spirits, but each one has a distinct personality, special abilities, and specific things they like. They're connected to elements of nature, rivers, forests, storms, fire, you name it. Followers of candomblé form a bond with these orishas through elaborate ceremonies filled with drumming, singing, dancing, and even ritual possession. During these ceremonies, the orishas are believed to enter the bodies of their devotees, allowing them to speak and act through them. The rituals are beautiful and often performed in sacred spaces called terreiros. These aren't just places to worship, they're entire communities where people came together to celebrate, heal, and learn. You might see priests and priestesses dressed in white, chanting and moving to hypnotic rhythms designed to call the orishas. Everything about these rituals is precise and meaningful, from the music to the clothing to the offering given to the spirits. Unlike Wiccan circles or covens, which tend to be more structured and private, candomblé rituals are social events. It's a community effort where everyone has a role to play. Candomblé focuses on building relationships with the orishas, serving them and asking for their guidance and protection. Now, Umbanda is a bit different. It's like candomblé's more flexible, open-minded cousin. It also deals with spirits and ritual ceremonies, but its approach is broader and includes influences from spiritualism, Catholicism, and even indigenous Brazilian beliefs. Umbanda is often described as a melting pot because it welcomes so many different ideas and practices. It's less rigid than candomblé and focuses more on healing communication with spirits and personal growth. One of the things that makes Umbanda special is its belief in guiding spirits. These spirits are thought to be wise beings who once lived human lives and now act as mentors. Practitioners believe they can communicate with these guides during rituals to receive advice, healing, and protection. Some of the most famous spirits include Caboclos, spirits of indigenous people, and Pretos Velos, who's the spirits of African ancestors, and Crianças, spirits of children. Each one brings its own wisdom and energy to the table. Where Candomblé focuses heavily on ritual and devotion to orishas, Umbanda feels more fluid and inclusive. Its ceremonies are often public, inviting anyone who seeks guidance or healing to join. You'll find rituals where mediums go into trances to allow spirits to speak through them, for instance, offering messages of comfort, advice, or sometimes warning. This mix of beliefs makes Umbanda especially fascinating because it adapts and grows as people's needs change. Both of these systems are part of Brazil's cultural identity, but they're also spiritual practices with deep meaning for those who follow them. Even though Candomblé and Umbanda are often lumped together, it's important to remember they're not the same. They have their own ways of connecting with the spirit world, their own rituals, and their own reasons for existing. And here's something worth mentioning. Unlike Wicca, which you can pick up from books or online sources for the eclectic part of it, Candomblé and Umbanda are mostly taught in person, again, a lot like Gardnerian witchcraft, through experience and dedication. You can't just read a guide and call yourself a practitioner. It's all about mentorship, community, and building your own knowledge over time. While Wicca is often practiced by solitary witches or small groups, usually the eclectic variety, Candomblé and Umbanda are far more community-centered. They're not just about personal enlightenment or magical power. They're about taking care of everyone involved. Healing is a big deal in both systems, especially in Umbanda, where mediums often offer their services to anyone in need free of charge. For many followers, it's less about performing spells and more about creating harmony between themselves, their community, and the spirit world. But with all their beauty and cultural importance, these traditions have also faced a lot of prejudice and misunderstanding. People who don't understand them often assume the worst, just like with voodoo. But in reality, these practices are about honoring spirits, healing, and finding guidance, not about curses or dark magic. Candomblé and Umbanda are proof that there's no one way to experience magic or spirituality. What matters most is the connection you build, whether it's with deities, spirits, or simply the people around you. And understanding these traditions for what they truly are, rather than what outsiders think they are, can open up a whole new world of appreciation and respect. Mexico is a country with a long history of magic, mystery, and deeply rooted spiritual practices. From the ancient Aztecs and Mayans to the modern-day healers and folk practitioners, Mexico is a land where the mystical and the everyday often blend together. Two of the most fascinating and still thriving practices are brujeria and curanderismo. These traditions are as rich and varied as the culture itself, but they don't always fit neatly into what we might call witchcraft. Let's start with brujeria, a word that most people translate as witchcraft. But here's the catch. It's not just one thing. It can refer to healing, spiritual guidance, protection, or sometimes something more sinister. The term brujo or bruja can mean different things depending on who you ask. For some, it's a title of power and respect, while others see it as something dark and dangerous. Brujeria is like a toolbox filled with all kinds of magical techniques. There's spell work, charms, rituals, and even curses. Some practitioners focus on healing and helping people, while others might use their skills for revenge or control. The choice often depends on the individual's beliefs, intentions, and personal code of ethics. Unlike Wicca, which has a more structured set of guidelines, brujeria can be wild and unpredictable, shaped mostly by the practitioner's own goals and experiences. Now, it's important to understand that brujeria isn't necessarily tied to any specific religion. It's more like a mix of indigenous beliefs, Spanish influence, and even Catholic practices. Some brujos and brujas might call upon saints, while others use pre-Hispanic deities or spirits. This blending of beliefs makes brujeria incredibly flexible and adaptable. What matters most is what works, not necessarily where it comes from. Curanderismo, on the other hand, is all about healing. Think of it as a folk medicine system mixed with spiritual practices. Curanderos and curanderas, those who practice curanderismo, focus on helping people with physical, emotional, and spiritual problems. Unlike brujos or brujas who might dabble in curses or hexes, curanderos are usually seen as good-hearted healers. The cool part of curanderismo is that it builds traditional indigenous healing methods with Catholic rituals and prayers. You might see a curandero using herbs, massage, or special cleansings called limpias to cure everything from sicknesses to bad luck. But at the same time, they may also use holy water, rosaries, or prayers to call upon divine assistance. It's all about finding balance and restoring harmony, both within the person and in the environment. One of the most fascinating aspects of curanderismo is how much it values spiritual cleansing. A limpia can involve sweeping the body with herbs, eggs, or even flowers to clear away negative energy. Sometimes the curandero will break an egg over the person's body and then read its contents like a fortune teller. Other times, they'll burn copal or other herbs to chase away harmful spirits. Each technique has a purpose, and it's often personalized to fit the specific problem someone is dealing with. Curanderos often work with items that feel more like everyday objects: eggs, herbs, candles, or blessed water. They make use of whatever is accessible and meaningful within their culture. That practicality is part of what makes curanderismo so enduring. It adapts and evolves with the people who practice it. Even though brujeria and curanderismo are separate traditions, they do overlap sometimes. A person might go to a curandero for healing but also visit a bruja for more direct spell work, or a bruja might use elements of curanderismo in their rituals. It's not always a clear line between one and the other. Instead, it's more like a spectrum where different practices blend and shift. Here's something interesting. Both brujeria and curanderismo are often practiced by people who also consider themselves Catholic. In Mexico, it's not unusual for someone to go to Mass on Sunday, but also visit a curandero for a healing ritual on Monday. It's not seen as a contradiction. Instead, it's just part of life. The saints, angels, and even Jesus himself are sometimes called upon during rituals, not as a sign of disrespect, but as a way to draw upon divine power for healing and protection. Just like voodoo in Haiti and candomblé in Brazil, these Mexican practices have faced a lot of misunderstandings. Some people view brujeria as something evil or dangerous, especially when it involves curses or hexes. But for those who practice it, it's often about survival, justice, or protection. Curanderismo, on the other hand, is usually respected but sometimes seen as outdated or unscientific. Still, it endures because people believe it works, and for many, it really does. Brujeria and curanderismo, meanwhile, are more like living traditions, always changing, always adapting. They don't have official rules or guidelines. Instead, they rely on personal experience, cultural heritage, and community knowledge. But what makes them all magical is the way they allow people to connect with something greater than themselves. Whether it's through spells, prayers, rituals, or healings, the goal is often the same: to bring harmony and balance to a world that can feel chaotic and unpredictable. Brujeria and curanderismo are also reminders that magic isn't always about wands and cauldrons. Sometimes it's about finding comfort and strength in the beliefs you've grown up with. Sometimes it's about taking control of your own life when everything else feels out of reach. The Philippines is a place where magic, healing, and spirituality have thrived for centuries, weaving their way into daily life and tradition. Even though many Filipinos are deeply religious, mostly Catholic, a whole other world of mystical practices exists right alongside mainstream faith. Two of the most interesting are Kulam and Albularyo. These systems aren't like Wicca or Voodoo, but they carry their own power and system. Let's start with Kulam, which is often considered the closest thing to what people in the West might call witchcraft. But even that comparison doesn't quite fit. Kulam is usually associated with sorcery, curses, and spells aimed at harming or manipulating someone. But it's not all dark magic. Sometimes practitioners known as Mangkukulam use their abilities for protection or even healing. The word Mangkukulam itself sounds as a little spooky, and that's because it carries a lot of weight in Filipino culture. It's the kind of word that can send chills down your spine if it's aimed at you. Many people believe that Mangkukulam can cause illness, misfortune, or mental torment just by focusing their intentions. But what makes Kulam so fascinating is that it's not simply about throwing curses around. It's about understanding how energy and intention can affect the world. Practitioners of Kulam are thought to have a natural gift or special knowledge passed down through family lines. Kulam can be performed with simple objects, a candle, a doll, or even a piece of someone's hair or clothing. It's raw, direct, and sometimes shockingly effective. Stories of people falling ill or having bad luck after crossing paths with a Mangkukulam aren't uncommon, especially in rural areas where traditional beliefs remain strong. But not everyone who practices magic in the Philippines is a Mangkukulam. That's where the Albularyo comes in. While Kulam is often feared and associated with darker intentions, Albularyo is more about healing and protection. It's a form of folk medicine mixed with spiritual practices that have been around long before the Spanish colonized the Philippines. The Albularyo is like a healer, herbalist, and spiritual guide all rolled into one. People visit them for all kinds of problems: sickness, bad luck, relationship issues, or even spiritual disturbances. They use herbs, oils, prayers, and rituals to try to cure both the body and the soul. What makes Albulario special is their ability to blend indigenous knowledge with elements of Catholicism. Prayers to saints or the Virgin Mary might be part of the healing process, along with chanting or burning herbs. One of the most well-known practices among Albulario is the Tawas ritual. It's kind of like a spiritual diagnosis. The healer melts a candle over water or places an egg under the person's pillow while they sleep. The shapes that appear in the melted wax or the patterns in the egg are believed to reveal what's causing the problem, whether it's a spiritual attack, negative energy, or even a curse. Once the problem is identified, the Albulario can prescribe a cure, usually involving herbs, prayers, or protective charms. You might be wondering if Kulam and Albulario ever overlap. The answer is yes, but it's complicated. While the Albulario are generally seen as good-hearted healers, some also know how to combat Kulam directly. They might create anting, protective amulets, or perform rituals to reverse curses. In some cases, an Albulario will even be called upon to act as a kind of magical detective, figuring out who sent a curse and why. The idea of Kulam and Albulario being complete opposites is not quite right. It's more like two sides of the same coin. Both involve using energy, intention, and spiritual tools to affect the world around them. It's just that one is more commonly linked to harm or manipulation, while the other is focused on healing and protection. What makes these practices so interesting is how they've survived and adapted over time. Spanish colonization tried to stamp out traditional beliefs, but instead they blended together. Catholicism became part of the magic rather than erasing it. Today, you might find an Albulario who starts a healing session with a prayer to Saint Michael, then moves on to burning herbs or chanting ancient words handed down from their ancestors. There's no central authority or specific set of rules. Everything is based on personal experience, local customs, and family traditions. And because of that, it's constantly changing. But with that change comes risk. Just like in Mexico, practitioners of Kulam and Albulario face stigma and misunderstanding. Some people dismiss them as frauds, while others fear them as dangerous. But for those who believe, their power is very real. And even if you don't believe in magic, you can't deny the cultural impact these practices have had on Filipino life. It's also important to mention that Kulam and Albulario aren't always at odds. Some practitioners combine techniques from both systems, using healing methods to counter curses or prevent them. It's all about balance, and while some see Kulam as a threat, others see it as a tool, something that can be used for good or bad, depending on the person wielding it. What's especially cool about these traditions is how they continue to thrive, even as the world around them changes. Urbanization, technology, and modern medicine haven't wiped them out. Instead, they've adapted, finding new ways to remain relevant and useful to the people who seek them out. The Philippines is proof that magic doesn't always fit into neat categories or follow predictable rules. It evolves, just like everything else, and even if the world keeps spinning toward the future, the roots of these practices remain strong and unbreakable. Scandinavia, with its icy fjords, rugged landscapes, and rich mythology, feels like the perfect backdrop for mystical practices. And believe it or not, magic has been part of Nordic culture for a very long time. Two of the most fascinating types of magic from this region are Seder and runic magic. Even though these traditions are ancient, they've found new life in modern practices, proving that magic never really fades, it just transforms. Let's start with Seder. This magical art was mostly practiced during the Viking Age, but has roots going back even further. It's often described as a form of trance magic, involving rituals that put the practitioner into a kind of altered state where they could interact with spirits, foretell the future, or even influence events. Think of it like tuning your mind to a different frequency, one that lets you tap into these things most people can't see or hear. What's really interesting is that Seder wasn't just about power or control. It was also about understanding, healing, and communication. Practitioners called Velva if they were female or Sedermen if they were male were sort of like spiritual guides or shamans. They weren't just casting spells for fun. They were using their skills to help their communities, whether it was through prophecy, healing, rituals, or blessings. The actual rituals could be pretty dramatic. A Volva might sit on a raised platform surrounded by people chanting or singing special songs to help her enter a trance. Once she reached that altered state, she would communicate with spirits or see visions of what was to come. In some ways, it's not so different from how some modern witches or psychics might perform their craft, except with a very distinct Nordic flavor. Unlike systems that rely on written spells or structured ceremonies, Seder was all about intuition and experience. It wasn't something you could just pick up from a book. Instead, it was passed down through mentorship worship and practice often kept secret from those outside the tradition. And because it relied so much on the practitioner's own abilities, it could look very different from one person to the next. Now let's talk about runic magic. If you've ever seen those strange angular symbols carved into stones or jewelry, you've already had a glimpse of this tradition. Runes were originally an alphabet used by various Germanic tribes, including the Norse, but they weren't just letters, they were symbols of power, each with its own meaning and energy. Runes could be used for writing, but they could also be used as tools for divination and magic. Practitioners would carve or paint runes onto objects, like pieces of wood or stone, to attract certain energies or bring about specific outcomes. For example, the rune Fehu was linked to wealth and success, while Algiz symbolized protection. Arranging runes in particular patterns or chanting their names was thought to amplify their power. Divination was a huge part of runic magic. Practitioners would draw runes from a bag or cast them onto a cloth, then interpret the way they landed. Each rune had a specific meaning, but the way they interacted with each other could change the message. It was all about interpreting symbols, which meant that understanding runes took a lot of intuition and skill. One of the most well-known stories involving runes comes from the Norse mythology itself. According to legend, the god Odin hung himself from the world tree, the Yggdrasil, for 9 days and nights as a sacrifice to gain wisdom. At the end of his ordeal, he gained the knowledge of runes and their secrets. Because of this, runes were often seen as gifts from the gods, carrying a kind of divine power. Seder and rune magic were very much tied to community and culture. They weren't separate practices you could just choose to dabble in. They were deeply connected to religion, storytelling, and daily life. Unlike Wicca, which has a fairly organized structure and established rituals, Seder and runic magic were more flexible and often adapted to fit the needs of the moment. Even today, modern practitioners are reviving these old ways through heathenry and Norse paganism. Some people work with runes for divination or spell work, while others attempt to recreate Seder rituals as closely as possible. And while a lot of what we know comes from sagas, poems, and archaeological discoveries, practitioners are constantly finding new ways to bring this ancient arts into the present. But it's not all about preserving the past. Just like with brujeria in Mexico and voodoo in Haiti, Seder and runic magic have evolved. People who practice them today are just as likely to experiment and mix new ideas into their craft as they are to keep things traditional. It's all about making these practices work in a modern world. There's also something special about the connection between Seder and nature. Practitioners often work with the natural world, trees, animals, weather patterns, to enhance their magic. It's not about controlling nature, but understanding and working with it, sort of like speaking its language. Of course, with anything magical, there's always people who misunderstand or judge. For a long time, the Christianization of Scandinavia pushed these practices underground. They were often considered evil or dangerous, especially because of their association with pagan gods. But despite all that, they survived, partly because they were so deeply rooted in the culture and mythology of Norse people. Today, Seder and runic magic aren't just historical curiosities. They're living practices, full of creativity, dedication, and respect for the old ways. And whether someone is using runes for divination or attempting a trance ritual, the essence of these traditions still feels as alive and powerful as ever. Now that we've journeyed through Haiti, Brazil, Mexico, the Philippines, and Scandinavia, it's time to tie everything together. Each of these magical systems has its own beauty and strength, but they all share something incredible: the ability to adapt, endure, and connect people to something greater. Exploring the magic of different cultures around the world shows just how incredibly diverse and creative people can be. From the spirit-filled rituals of Haiti's voodoo to the nature-connected practices of Scandinavia's Seder, every tradition has its own way of tapping into something powerful and meaningful. Even though each one feels completely unique, they all share a deep desire to understand the mysteries of life, heal the soul, and find guidance in something beyond the ordinary. And that's pretty amazing when you think about it. Magic is just one more way people make sense of the world. But what's really cool is that these practices are still alive and evolving. They're not just ancient history or dusty old books. They're part of real people's lives, helping them connect to their cultures, ancestors, and even themselves. Whether it's the Volva speaking with spirits, or the Abuelarios performing a healing ritual, or a bruja working with herbs and prayers, magic is as alive today as it ever was. Hopefully, learning about all these different systems has shown you that there's more than one way to practice magic, and that understanding and respecting those differences makes your own path that much stronger. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Witch into Working. What do you think of some of these practices? Have you ever been part of them? Let us all know down in the comments below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, and please subscribe if you haven't already. And don't forget to ring that little bell and be reminded of the future and exciting, special, great awesome episodes to come. I love you guys and gals. Blessed be.